Chapter 33, The Switch. As soon as old Neil finished speaking, the illusory eyes in the shadows behind him vanished, and even Klein, in the PSI state, could not see a trace of them. It's a symbol of ritual magic, old Neil explained, chuckling. A bit of a miracle. PSI is an enhanced version of the yin and yang eye. Like a child with a new toy, Klein turned away from the shadows and looked around the room to see what the difference was between the alchemy lab now and the one before. The shadows outlined the objects, the long table, the test tubes, the scales, the cups, the cupboard, all the same as they had been before Klein turned on PSI, without a scintilla of light. Inanimate objects have no spirit, Klein wondered, scanning the silver boxes on the table. Suddenly, he saw glows appear inside them, blue as the sky, bright as the stars, or red as fire. Do materials derived from extraordinary species have some kind of life, vitality, even after they're dead? Klein asked old Neil, looking for words, full of curiosity. The precise description is that they retain a certain amount of spirit, which is one of the keys to a successful potion, and one of the causes of extraordinary failure. As Dunn should have told you, old Neil explained frankly. He laughed, remembering something. I remember that the recipe for the body snatcher contains dried adult black-spotted frogs. It takes a lot of courage to take this potion. Klein imagined it, felt a little sick, and did not agree with old Neil. He turned his eyes to the lack of sufficient light around him. However, there were no nearly invisible spirits and ghosts and other things he expected. Isn't the spirit world everywhere? He asked, puzzled. Old Neil yelled. Repeat after me, little fellow. This is the headquarters of the Night's Watch. This is the underground of the Church of the Night Goddess. There are many extraordinary people here. You think we'll let spirits and ghosts roam here? And the spirit world and spirits are two different things. Klein was a little embarrassed for a moment. He turned his head and pretended to look at the tiny gaslight at the entrance of the secret door. I see. As he spoke, his eyebrows suddenly began to twitch uncontrollably, as if in a spasm. What was going on? Klein was about to turn around and ask when he saw that at the edge of the bright yellow light, at the back of the secret door, a nearly transparent figure stood silently. It took on human form, and its aura color blended perfectly into the dim environment, making it difficult to distinguish. Shh! Klein's eyebrows twitched, and his vision was confused. He focused his attention again, but there was no invisible figure. Strange. He turned around and said, Mr. Neil, I have a twitch in the eyebrows and a little pain. Ha ha, this is very normal. You are just promoted to extraordinary. Psychic vision will cause a great burden on your spiritual body and has been consumed. And the external symptoms are eyebrow twitching, head tingling, oversensitivity, a little hallucination. And in a psychic state, you are easily uncomfortable in a strange environment and easily affected by the emotions of others. These are things to be careful about and must be adapted and eliminated through repeated practice. In addition, use moderation and end in time. Old Neil smiled and answered, How do you feel like you have a kind of happy mood? Klein asked, How do you exit a psychic state? He wanted to mention the invisible figure he just saw, but when he heard the symptom of a little hallucination, he gave up the idea. Combined with the twitching and tingling in the eyebrows, the answer of old Neil was entirely predictable. Imagine the object as you just did. Focus your attention, then switch to a meditation state. Close your eyes, control your spirituality, repeatedly tell it to stop, and then open your eyes. You will find that the psychic vision is over. Old Neil described it leisurely, and only added at the end, Of course, this is the most cumbersome and clumsy method. We can repeatedly imply ourselves in meditation and affect spirituality through practice, leaving simple switching movements. For example, I tap the brow twice, which can simply open the psychic vision, and tap it twice again, which can simply end it. How to set up the movements depends on your own habits and preferences. I see. Klein thought for a while and decided to imitate old Neil, using the tapping between the eyebrows as a switch of psychic vision. Once is easy to be confused with the instinctive tapping of the head. 3 times may waste precious time in a crisis situation. And as for the snapping of the fingers and other movements, it is too personal and easily detected. He gathered his attention and visualized the gathering of a light ball and re-entered the state of meditation. Under the guidance of old Neil, after repeated hints and practice, he finally set up the switching movements. Clenching his fist, he tapped the brow twice with the root joint of the index finger. And suddenly, there were many different thicknesses and colors of the aura light before his eyes. He tapped it twice again, and everything returned to its original state, and there was no special feeling. I finally mastered it, he said with a sense of happiness. By this time, he was so tired that he could fall asleep at any moment, and his head was aching as though he had been up 3 all-nighters. Old Neil smiled and said, "We are not sleepless, and every time we over-practice or overuse our powers of sight, we need a period of sleep to recover. You can go home now and rest. This afternoon, go to Welch's house on the road to Iron Cross Street and try to find clues to the Antigonus family notebooks as soon as possible. Tomorrow, we will continue to teach you about the occult. Of course, you must not forget to read the historical documents." All right. Klein approved of old Neil's arrangement with both hands and feet. Taking his cane, he left the alchemy room. Watching the secret door close, and old Neil returned to the armory. Klein rubbed his temples and brow and took the handrail and walked up the stairs step by step. At this moment, Dunsmith came up behind him. With a slight curve of his mouth and a deep look, he said, "Old Neil says you are very adaptable, whether it is meditation or powers of sight. Maybe it is just a special fortune teller," Klein replied modestly. He guessed that Dunn had been guarding the armory for old Neil. Dunn slowed down his pace, only a little ahead of Klein. After a few seconds of silence, he said, without turning around, "Remember, curiosity killed the cat, and it killed the extraordinary. Don't try to pry into whispers you shouldn't hear and beings you shouldn't see. All right?" Klein knew this was another reminder of the extraordinary's lack of control. Entering Blackthorn's security, he greeted Roseanne, who clearly didn't know she was an extraordinary, and walked slowly out onto the street and back to Daffodil Street on the trolley, almost falling asleep along the way. It was still morning, and the temperature was in the mid-20s, so Klein took the brass key from his belt and opened the door of his house. The house was unfurnished, the living room and dining room were empty, and Benson and Melissa, one at work and one at school, had left early. Klein closed the door behind him and hurried upstairs to his own bedroom with a bookcase. After taking off his tuxedo and hanging it on the coat rack, he slumped into bed and fell asleep as soon as he hit the pillow. Klein was awakened by the bright sunlight. He turned his head to one side and slowly opened his eyes to see that it was still a hot day outside. "What time is it? You won't miss the afternoon tarot party, will you?" He struggled to get up and walked to the coat rack, his pocket watch still in the inside pocket of his tuxedo. He forgot not only this, but also to close the bedroom door and pull the curtains at the bay window. Crack! Klein took out his pocket watch, turned it on, and was relieved. It was just after 12 o'clock, plenty of time before the appointed 3 o'clock. It was Monday, the day he and the upside-down man and Justice were to meet. Klein made a thinking gesture and tapped his eyebrows twice. Again, his vision changed, and he saw his aura return to its bright color. He tapped twice more and exited the vision. He walked easily to the first floor, boiled a pot of water, put in some poor tea, and nibbled a piece of rye bread with it and a little cream. After that, Klein turned out his history textbook and original notes and leisurely reviewed and consolidated. At 2:57 in the afternoon, Klein closed the books, put the cap on his pen, and brushed the curtains. Then he locked the bedroom door, making the room very dark. He tapped his eyebrows twice again, opened the vision, and looked around. After confirming that there were no invisible beings in the room, Klein closed the vision, took out his pocket watch, and checked the time. Tick-tock, tick-tock. At 1:03, he took his feet and took for counterclockwise steps, as before, forming a square, and he silently said the mantra in Chinese for each step, except that he did not prepare staple food this time. Klein closed his eyes and felt a slight itch on the back of his hand, as if the 4 black dots that formed a small square were swelling and emerging. The wild screams and seductive whispers began to echo, but Klein found his headache less severe than before. It was not that he was immune, but that he could control himself not to actively listen. Being a specialist, he had more self-control in such an environment. Soon, his body became lighter and he floated upward, seeing the diffuse, gray, boundless, hazy mist. Seeing the dark red stars, 2 of which seemed to have a subtle connection with him and felt strangely familiar. Klein looked at his blurred self and murmured in confusion. What did old Neil say about the star spirits? He calmed for a few seconds and once again conjured up from the gray mist the magnificent temple, the long bronze table directly under the broad dome, and the 22 high-backed chairs with symbols of different constellations. Klein quietly walked to the top and sat down, letting his body and face enveloped by more dense gray mist, then reached out his right hand and pointed at the 2 familiar dark red stars, making a wonderful connection.